I have to tell you too, I just did the same thing because I felt like I was leaning down and I was so sick of it. So I grabbed the fattest, smallest book I could find that was within arm's length, and it happened to be the Constitution and selected writing to the founding fathers. And I was like, this is just feels right, you know? Let's have it
Awesome.
prop up my microphone. Hi, welcome to How Literature Can Save the World, where we explore the written word's impact on our culture and our relationships with ourselves, each other, and the environment. I'm your host, Michelle R. Brady. Grab a drink or a blanket or an animal to pet, and let's begin to make our lives more meaningful, one book at a time.
The trouble that mankind makes is that he thinks he's Italian, he's German, he's Spanish. We're all humans on this beautiful paradise is our earth.
So today we have Matt K. Parker, and he has a super fun bio that I shall share in its entirety due to the funness. Matt K. Parker has been many things in his life: a musician, a programmer, an activist, a writer, a consultant, a business owner, a husband, a father, and he's lived in many places, including Texas, New York, California, and Connecticut. But amidst all the life and career changes and all the moving from one coast to the other and back, and the one constant in his life has been reading. And whether hiding with a book in his closet as a kid, or burying his nose in a book on a subway train, or waking up before dawn to get a quiet hour of reading done before his many boisterous children awaken, which we have to talk about, Matt has always found refuge in reading. And although his reading tastes have varied widely over his life, he has for the past few years increasingly settled into reading literature from the ancient to the contemporary. Today, Matt likes to interact with other fans of literature on Twitter, where he both sources recommendations for books from others and also shares out his own thoughts on what he's reading. And Matt currently dreams of founding a nonprofit dedicated to increasing adult literature readership by an order of magnitude, focused first on readership in the United States and then expanding to the entire globe. And so I just want to say that I approached Matt based on his avid reading and a desire for him to just tell me about all the things I don't have time to read, and then to say to me, this is the book for you. I have actually purchased, I think 3 now books that you have recommended. But like, I don't know, there's no way to keep up with you. So I think the best thing to do is for you to just tell us everything. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Michelle. And yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so my first question was not what I was going to ask. I was going to ask you just like go through your like fun life, but now I want to know about this nonprofit, and like what the plan is, where you're at, what you're thinking, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's a dream. And it's in the planning stages of a dream. So I just want to be realistic about where I'm at with it. The idea struck me some months ago. I have been more or less unemployed this year, um, and in the midst of applying for jobs, and also trying to find clients for my consulting business, really just trying to find some way to keep some money flowing in. I've also thought a lot about what would, what would I find incredibly fulfilling, and as I think the answer sort of became obvious at some point. If I'm going to do something other than read and write, um, then it would be to promote reading and writing. And so the idea of founding a nonprofit dedicated to increasing adult literature readership in America and then around the world really just sort of fell out of that line of thought. I think, literature, as far as I understand and can tell, it's simply um, not very popular these days. That's not to say books aren't still popular. I think there's still a market out there for people that read, but it's a lot of commercial fiction, a lot of genre fiction, and I don't have anything against any of that. I'm all for people reading what they enjoy and what brings them joy. But I think the fact that literature isn't getting read widely isn't a statement about literature per se. It's really a statement about marketing, about capitalism, and some forces that maybe perversely incentivize some forms of books over others. And so I thought, well, we should do something about that. We should increase the market of people out there interested in consuming really, art in the written word. That's how I think about literature. I know there's no maybe single standard definition of literature out there, but I think when I look at it and when I look at all the different sort of forms of written word out there, when I think about literature, I think about those forms of written word that to me just scream as really these creations of the human spirit and that really speak to who we are as a species, in some way, shape, or form, whether it's light or dark, happy or sad, speculative or realistic. So, yeah, anyways, I'll stop there. That's where it's at. If you're listening to this and you like the idea of doing this nonprofit, I can tell you what I have found in short order. There is no shortage of people passionate about doing this. What there is a shortage of people with lots of money passionate about doing this. And what we really need are those billionaire benefactors who love literature and want to see more people reading it to listen to this and to reach out and become to donate to this worthy cause. That's what I'm looking for at the moment.
I think it's interesting because it's not, I mean, I hear what you're saying about marketing and publicity and, the things that make money. So I guess my question for you is there a way that your nonprofit, like what are the actual things you would like to do if you've thought of them, if you haven't, no big deal, that would help change any of this stuff, what can we do besides money? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
There is not enough. Um, there is not enough examples out there for people today to look at of other people talking about literature, reading literature, praising literature, for them to want to do it themselves. I think so much of what we desire is really desiring the desires of others. And that's almost a sad thing about human nature, but I think it's a very real thing. So when I think about the kinds of experiments that the nonprofit would run, it's sort of aimed at how do we increase the sort of mimetic pull towards literature in the world, and it could be anything from celebrity book clubs. Dua Lipa does this now, and I think if we had more and more of that kind of stuff in the world, that would be one way to go about it. Really, just ways of creating sort of making it seem cool to people.
Yeah.
Literature needs to seem cool. And if famous people out there think it's really cool, a lot of other people who aren't famous will think it's really cool.
I hear what you're saying. I think that that's right. I think that that's definitely right. I think one of the challenges might not be that books are difficult to understand or to read. You know, I think to your point that maybe people, when they read things, don't have anyone to talk to about them for the most part. Obviously, we have the internet now, and so you can find people to talk to about books that you've read that are maybe more obscure than other people. But one thing I think is interesting and different from art and music is that it takes a lot more time. It takes more time to read a book than to look at a painting or to listen to a song. I think that is also something that you have to kind of battle. But I do love the idea that you have. I think that it would benefit everyone. I read a study yesterday, and it was talking about how reading, doesn't just increase your knowledge of whatever it was you just read, and it doesn't just increase your empathy of the people and the characters like I always talk about, but it also, you know, shortens the distance between the dendrites of your neurons in your brain and makes you think faster. I mean, just like, cardio or traveling and all of those things that help make you literally smarter. And I wonder, why we're all so reticent to take advantage of things that make us better, like exercise, and reading is exercise for your brain. And I think that that's kind of maybe a bigger problem than just making it cool. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm
No,
wrong.
I think there's something to that. Absolutely. And I can say I'm not just read literature in my life. I've actually gone through many phases of reading. I've also gone through phases of not reading anything, but for a while I read more or less nothing but psychology. And then for a while I read nothing but philosophy. And now for a while I've more or less read nothing but literature. Um, but I think, part of what I came to understand during my sort of time reading psychology was the experiences that we have and how those experiences change um, on a sort of 2x2 diagram or 2x2 plot, if you will, where one dimension is challenge and the other dimension is skill. And I think when you're talking about works of literature, uh, you need a skill sort of commensurate to the challenge of the text itself to have a flow-like experience reading it. And that's what you really want when you're reading. You want to be in the zone. You want to just be, you want the text to sort of to be all figure and there to be sort of no ground left, right? Like it just takes center stage in your attention. And that's
You don't
called a
even know what's
flow.
happening. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's called a flow experience. But I think what can often happen is if we dive into a text that the challenge of which is sort of above our skill level, the experience can be very anxiety-inducing. It can be very frustrating, and it's not a fun experience. It's not a positively valenced experience at that point. It's negatively valenced. This is why improvement is tricky. This is why so many of us, either as children or as adults, resist practice because practice is about intentionally putting yourself in a situation in which your skill level is not commensurate with the challenge. Um, so yeah, I think there's very much something to what you're saying about this aspect of reading and literature.
Okay, so I was going to ask you to just talk about all your books that you want to talk about, but now I want to know more about if there was a book that you read on, psychology and especially philosophy. If there's any of those things that you would love to share, or specific philosophies that you've found really helpful in developing your own life vision. I feel like you can combine a lot of different things to make who you are. Is this too much to ask you right now?
That's great. I'm happy to talk about it. So yeah, I think sort of divide my nonfiction reading into um, for lack of a better term, spiritual, psychological, and philosophical.
Oh, I love it so much.
Um,
Okay.
and and some of those lines get pretty blurry, to be honest. But when it comes to psychology, I think a lot of my own thoughts and understanding of the world has come from the works of, on the one hand, Abraham Maslow, his book Motivation and Personality. Was really quite eye-opening for me, the understanding of motivation and there being multiple different realms of motivation, deficiency motivation versus being motivation. And his concept of peak experiences, I think, really changed my understanding of the human being, but also the works of Freud and a lot of, honestly, secondary literature around Freud and Freudian psychoanalysis and how that's changed and hasn't changed over the sort of century since Freud um, originally wrote. But among Freud's own works, I think Civilization and Its Discontents should just be, require reading for everyone. It's such a small work and powerful work at the same time, very thoughtful, very provocative.
Yeah.
Well, on the spiritual side, I'm not religious or anything, but I will say that the works of Thich Nhat Hanh, which were recommended to me by a friend who's also a reader, and he passed away a few not long ago actually, but a few years ago, um, and he was a Buddhist monk and really just a prolific writer and a great writer. He makes so many, I think, very complicated concepts that come out of the Buddhist tradition quite accessible. And if you only read one work of his, I recommend The Art of Living. It's such a powerful work. And
I'm typing all this stuff down too, even though it's so funny. I'm going to have the transcripts, but I'm like, no, I must have it now. Okay, keep going.
yeah, and in terms of philosophy, again, it's a lot of probably more secondary literature than than primary sources, but I would say there have been some primary sources that have really just left a big mark on me, including The Concept of Anxiety by Soren Kierkegaard, along with Fear and Trembling. Both of those, I think, are among works of philosophy. They're quite accessible and very provocative, very thoughtful. He's sort of the proto-existentialist. He's on the one hand a Christian, but he's practically heretical in the way he thinks about it, and he talks about concepts like absurdity.
Yeah.
Uh,
I love
Albert,
when people try to just sort of synthesize all the things that they believe in and make it all work together. And sometimes I feel like we really do find a way to make everything kind of work, with a little bit of kind of twisted logic. And sometimes I think it's kind of comical, but yeah, keep key points here.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, yeah, in fact, on that, well, let me tell you just a couple of other works of philosophy that I think have made a big impact on me. The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus
Oh,
is a big one. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
literature and philosophy all together.
yeah,
Like that's the goal, the
absolutely,
aim. Except
absolutely.
as a writer.
Yeah, Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky is another great example of exactly that. It's literature and it's philosophy. It's his, one of his shortest works, and in my opinion, his best. It's just such an astounding work. Yeah, Notes from Underground. It's not one to miss.
I've never heard somebody say that that was his best before. I love that. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's a controversial take, but yeah. Um, uh, okay, I'm going to mention another philosopher, Martin Heidegger. He is probably the worst writer in the philosophical world. His writing is so just bloated and turgid, and you know, I almost can't stand him as a writer. Nonetheless, his thoughts are incredibly provocative. And I mean, Heidegger is easy to hate. He was a Nazi, more or less, and even if he was a weird one that they ended up hating, but like nonetheless, he was terrible and in many ways, but he is at the same time incredibly important in the history of sort of thought. And so if you can stomach it, I think Being in Time is a worthwhile read. Um, Anyways, also The World is Will and Representation, both of Volume 1 and Volume 2, by Schopenhauer. I think those are really just fascinating works that have shaped the way I see the world. I just want to get back to this sort of comment you made, or an aside almost, about how, we can sort of take all these different thoughts and sort of, through some twisted logic, sort of still make it all work and cohere. I don't think I really make things work and cohere, and I I I just want to say that reading has been a process for me of increasing humility. I have never been less certain about the world than I am today, and I accuse reading of that. And, but I also mean it in a good sense. I think, there are just so many things that I believe that I no longer believe, both, in small and big ways, that reading has caused me to doubt, to question, um, maybe on a couple of different dimensions. One, politically, um, I was raised in the Bible Belt in America in a very conservative family. But when I began to think for myself, I began to question all of those beliefs that I'd been taught by my parents and by my community. And I credit Steinbeck and reading The Grapes of Wrath in high school was sort of my first real awakening into the nature of injustice and exploitation, and that led me to become very left-wing in my late teens and early 20s in a very idealistic sense. And I think I spent many years sort of avoiding texts that I knew would challenge some of my idealism. And eventually, when I got around to them, my political beliefs changed to some extent. I no longer have sort of a utopian sense of the possibilities of society and the world. I still loathe injustice and exploitation and inequality and all that kind of stuff. But I have a lot less hope for what we can do about it than I used to, I should say. But I think in a very healthy way. And again, I credit reading with that. So reading the works of Milovan Žilas, who was both a poet and a writer and memoirist in Yugoslavia, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a dissident in the Soviet Union. Again, reading has just further sort of problematized all of my beliefs politically, and I could go on there. I think my understanding just of what even the world is has certainly been challenged by philosophy and my reading in philosophy. And when you read about things like transcendental idealism from Immanuel Kant through Schopenhauer and others, it really does cause you to question what are we even perceiving, all the way up to the present. You still have strains of this, like just recently, forgetting the author's names, I think it's Hoffman, The Case Against Reality is a recent book that really takes some ultimately Kantian notions about what things are, what we perceive, how that might be different from the things in themselves, and really maps it onto what we're understanding today about perception as it's evolved, and how that might be very different from what reality even is. So anyways, reading has done a lot of that for me. But I think, literature has gone a long way to lead me to have a very sort of, on the one hand, rich and perhaps on the other hand, less hopeful vision of humankind than I used to have. And again, I don't mean to say that in a way that should be seen as down or sad or anything like that. I think I hope, anyways, that I'm significantly more realistic, or at least more questioning of humankind than I used to be. So, when it comes to everything from reading, Virginia Woolf and To the Lighthouse, and Mrs. Dalloway, those are fascinating works and explorations of humanity and human nature and the human mind, their stream of consciousness, that I think really opened me up, along with The Waves. And again, just such an amazing work. Works like The Tunnel by William Gass, this incredibly misanthropic character who nonetheless is right about certain things, as much as you may hate to admit it. I think the works of Annie Ernaux.
Yes, I've read one of
Have
her books because of you as well.
Oh yeah, she's incredibly amazing, and I think she does a lot to help us come to terms with who we are through her own exploration of her own life and experiences, which are incredibly intimate, incredibly vulnerable, incredibly honest and raw. And if you're out there listening and you want to get started with Annie Ernaux, I recommend A Girl's Story and The Years. I think those two works give you a sense for both sort of intimacy, but at the same time, the breadth of her exploration. I could talk about other works that really struck me as a kid.
That's perfect. Yes, just talk about. I'll try to be quiet, but I'm so excited that I know I interrupt a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. And as a kid, I think really my love for reading began with, I'll say, four authors: Edgar Allan Poe, who scared the dickens out of me.
I loved his poetry weirdly, like was really into it. I memorized his poems as a kid.
I did
Kind of
too.
weird. You did?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, how weird am I?
No. His poetry spoke to me, and I knew nothing about poetry and
Like Annabelle.
large Annabelle Lee, absolutely. And I was I think quite lonely as a kid. I wasn't like the rest of my family. I was more or less made fun of by my father, especially for being such a nerd, reading all the time. He would chide me, tell me to go outside. Anyways, poems like Alone by Edgar Allan Poe, from childhood's hour, I've always been as others. I've never been as others were. I've never seen as others saw. Poetry like that really just spoke to me. And probably starting in the fifth grade, I learned about Edgar Allan Poe, and I'm sure we were made to read one of his stories, like The Telltale Heart or something, and I just devoured him. I was lucky enough to get his complete works in a single giant volume, all of his poetry, all of his stories, his unfinished novel, and just went at it and surfaced months later. Um, yeah, Ursula Le Guin, her Earthsea trilogy really just exploded in my brain when I read it. Again, I was probably sixth or seventh grade. I think both just uh, the beauty of her prose and her language. They are books that kids and young adults can read, but they are really works of literature. I think things she did in those books really blew my mind, my young reader mind. Like in the Earthsea trilogy in the second book, she spends the first book introducing you to Ged, and this person you're going to see as the hero of this trilogy. And then for the first 50 pages of the second book, it's as if Ged doesn't even exist, and it's as if magic doesn't even exist. And I was so blown away by that. It may seem silly, but stuff like that just really affected me.
No, it doesn't seem silly at all.
Steinbeck, as I mentioned, when I began reading him in high school, he was another author that I just devoured. In fact, I have sort of a problem almost in that when I find an author I like, I will sort of almost monomaniacally focus on them and go through their entire, oeuvre. Um, and I did that with Steinbeck in high school, and it really just blew me away. Both the beauty of his prose again, and stylistically, he to me was just eye-opening. But also the themes, both the humanity of it, in some ways the pessimism of it, in some ways the hope of it, all of that really just really affected me. Um, Lastly, I just want to say that there are two young adult authors that gave me a love for reading: Gary Paulson and Cynthia Voigt. Paulson wrote all these sort of adventure loner stories, but stylistically, he's very interesting too. He was the first author I read that would create a sentence out of a single word. And, when you're reading that in the fifth or sixth grade, you're like, wow, he's breaking a lot of rules. And suddenly you realize rules can be broken.
Yeah.
And he had that power for me. Cynthia Voigt, she wrote this Tillerman cycle, starting with Homecoming and books like Dicey Song and The Runner and
Yeah, I remember.
17 Against the Dealer. I think there's 7 or 8 of them. They were so powerful to me. These stories of these kids growing up into adults and teenagers, everything about it just really spoke to me. And their books filled with both hope and suffering and, social issues. And anyways, I love both those authors as a kid, and I still do. I think they're amazing. Salinger was probably the first transgressive author I read, and when I read Catcher in the Rye. And I think that opened my eyes as well. That prose didn't have to be beautiful, that in some ways it could be really crude and almost ugly in a way, and at the same time, incredibly powerful. And I credit Salinger with sort of exposing me to the world of transgressive literature.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's beautiful. It matters if it's real, or if it feels
Yeah.
real, or if it feels genuine, or if you feel like you can connect with this person despite that. And I think that that's something that I always took away from it. But sorry, keep going.
No, I think that's a brilliant insight. I mean, you could not imagine, I can't imagine, like if he had told Catcher in a, like third person omniscient narrator standpoint, or had a more traditional form of prose to it, Holden's story, I don't think would have had any of the power that it has, because he told it in Holden's voice, and that voice seems incredibly authentic, right? You're like, yeah, that's exactly how this kid would sound, and think and feel. Um, anyways, yeah, I loved Catcher in the Rye. And yeah, I know that's not for everyone. And I love that about literature too.
Yeah.
Literature hits everyone in very different ways. There have been works that I've reread over the years and that have hit me one way at first and another way later, and I liked it at one point and didn't like it at another point. That's just life. Oh, I think I was going to mention Stephen Crane.
Yes, you were.
When I read The Red Badge of Courage, that to me was an eye-opening work as well, because I think for two reasons. One, Crane does something I think interesting with color in that work, and the way he uses color to sort of light up the world and to communicate emotion, and that I had never seen before, really. I mean, colors like crimson and purple have this sort of important element in that story. The other thing, though, is that it's an ambiguous story. It can be read in two very different ways. Right, in one way, you have this um, kid who goes off to war and maybe is a little bit cowardly, and then redeems himself in the end with an act of heroism. That's one way you can read it. Another way you can read it is this kid goes off to war, very quickly sees how senseless war can be, how awful it can be, and voices it, right? He very clearly voices it in the story, um, and then gets sucked into the battle anyways, and can sort of maybe almost hoodwinked or tricked into believing it's something it isn't, into forgetting what he previously thought. I love that it could be read either way, and maybe both ways, have their merits. So that was a big, powerful book for me.
I never really thought about it the first way you talked about it. I thought about it as the second way, and I didn't think about, when I read it at least, that he was hoodwinked. I sort of felt like it was the thing that happens to everyone, which is it doesn't matter. If whatever the cause isn't real and everything is pointless because you're still in danger, and so are the people that you care about, and so you just got to do it. And I think, I've had people tell me before that writing on violence, and especially like, geopolitical violence and stuff, is not fun to read, and it's not something that's very entertaining, and if it's not heroic in the end, then, what are we trying to say? And I sort of want to share that, right? Like, because you think that everyone who's in a war believes in what they're doing, you're crazy. Some people just don't have any choice, and once you're on the ground, there's nothing else you can do except for try to survive. And I really love books that try to show that to people. So it's interesting though to hear what the different ideas of that things that people can take from it, because we all have our own baggage, and so we see it through our own eyes, and not necessarily the way that it was even meant.
That's very true. And I mean, certainly your interpretation resonates with me. I'd never fought in a war. I've never been in the military. Um, and interestingly, Stephen Crane had not also fought in a war, and people wondered, how in the heck did he write this? There was just this question of, oh, he must have been in a war. No, he wasn't. So how did he put this sort of little masterpiece together in a way that felt so genuine to all of those who had fought in war? Um, anyways, yeah, I think, these days, I always feel like I'm constantly catching up with the world of literature. There's just this almost seemingly infinite list of things I haven't read that I want to get to, authors I've never even broached, and it's led me to almost forcibly change my reading habits. At the start of this year, I more or less made a conscious choice to not monomaniacally focus on an author. Um, and to, if I read a work by one author, to force myself to pick up a different author next, no matter how much I loved the first author. Um, uh, and uh, and I'm glad I've done it, because I've just been exposed to so much this year that I probably wouldn't have. I would have gone much deeper into very specific places instead of more broadly. Um, it's led me this year to discover Turgenev and Shidrin, two 19th century Russian authors that I had never read, and that, to me weren't the big names in Russian literature, although I know they are to other people. And I'm very glad I have, because, what Turgenev, his craft is just so phenomenal. I read the book On the Eve recently, and it absolutely stood shoulder to shoulder, if not actually, quite honestly, above anything I've read by Dostoevsky, and as good as anything by Tolstoy. Um, and Shadrin, which I may not even be saying correctly. It was a pen name that he used. I read the Golovlyov family, which I actually heard recently described as the end of the 19th century Russian novel. It's sort of uh, the nail in the coffin of it, because it is such a despairing work. It is hilarious. It is very darkly hilarious. Don't get me wrong. I laughed from beginning to end, more or less. But it is a work of utter despair. And again, I find it to be as masterful, if not more, by anything I've read by Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. So anyways, trying to read more broadly has led me to those authors. I also am trying to do better about staying up to date with current literature. So, like I just read Your Name Here by Helen.
I'm going to ask you about it.
Yeah, by Helen DeWitt and Ilya Gridneff. And it is an amazing work for many reasons, including just it is such a mishmash of so many different forms, right? It's epistolarian in a sense, but with emails, not letters. Um, it is it's recursive. There are novels and then novels within novels, and you're constantly sort of um, figuring out from section to section, where are you in this sort of stack of um, eh, uh, almost dreamlike states. It's sort of like that movie Inception, where they keep going deeper and deeper into dreams. In this book, it feels like you're getting sucked deeper and deeper into um, layers of novels. And the prose itself is really wonderful, really wild. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. It was. I don't always have this experience when I'm reading literature. I don't always find literature to be a page turner. In some cases, literature for me is I need to take a break. I need to read this page. I need to stop and really digest it, and then go on to the next page and the next. This is the opposite of that. This is, uh, I really struggled to put it down. I had to put it down because I have a life. But if I didn't have a life, I wouldn't have put it down. I would have just read it from beginning to end. It doesn't feel like a 600-page book at all.
Okay, let me just tell you that your description of why you loved it at first, which was that it was challenging and had layers within layers within layers that you had to kind of remember, is, I think, not always a plus for people. And I guess that's what I was trying to say earlier, is that, like, some people love a challenge, or they love that it's interesting and different, and they want to dive in and see where it goes, and they're just willing to trust the author and ride with it, you know? And I have noticed that others, really want a hand-holding. They wanna know that it's gonna have a normal arc. They wanna know that everything makes sense and that they can follow it cleanly, and they don't trust the author, and if they don't feel like they're getting there, they're gonna just put it down.
Yeah, well, I guess I have come to appreciate lots of different types of literature. At the end of the day, I think a text stands out to me, um, probably more. The through line through all the things I really love probably has to go back to the confidence of the author, um, uh, and that can come through in a very straightforward narrative, with maybe very sort of traditional prose, or at least not, overly stylized prose. A book I read earlier this year, I Who Have Never Known Men, by Jacqueline Harpman.
I love a short book. Everyone knows that about me.
Yes, I've heard you say that, and I do too. I am very much biased towards shorter works, and have to gear myself up to read longer works. But it's an example, that to me, that's a book that doesn't stand out stylistically to me. What stood out to me was the confidence with which she told that story, and the cumulative effect of the story itself. I was really gutted by the end. I was so quietly devastated. I mean, I wasn't depressed, but um,
And there's no
What's
go
that?
ahead, there's no wrap up. I love that too. I felt like some of the things you said earlier about, your earlier idealism and what it really is culminated into is realism. Humans, while we have the potential to make utopias, individually, we're not going to. But what we can do is find a way to cooperate if we realize that those values are, helpful to us individually, I guess. And some people are more willing to cooperate than others.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm slowly becoming a little more realistic about humankind. I mean, when I sort of think about, what is to be done in the world, to me, I sort of think we should try to make the world a more equitable place, and we should also remember that humans have an infinite capacity to mess everything up, to make each other sad and miserable, to hurt each other, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't shoot for. Um, a world that is systematically eliminating things like oppression and exploitation, et cetera, et
Yes,
cetera.
sure.
We can still shoot for that, and we will still mess it up along the way. But at least we're always going to mess it up, no matter where we're heading.
Might as well
All right,
try.
so let's head to a better place if we're going to mess it up, no matter what. That's sort of, I think that's, and again, to me, that's my takeaway from the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, right? Like, yeah, that stone. It's not going to stay atop that mountain.
Yep.
It's going to roll back down, and there's nothing we can do about it. So let's at least be happy with our lot and give it a shot, and just go at it. So, anyways, but maybe back to literature. So, I Who Have Never Known Men, on the one hand, is sort of straightforward versus Your Name Here, which is completely wild. I wouldn't say it's a hard read, though. In the same way that watching the film Adaptation by Charlie
Oh, I love
Kaufman,
that. I love
yeah,
that.
which is referenced in the book, by the way. They explicitly
Oh,
say, like,
really?
hey,
Oh,
hey, you have these exchanges between the two authors, either as fictional characters in the book or sometimes just as the authors themselves. And they'll say, like, hey, aren't we doing Charlie Kaufman's adaptation here? But isn't that more or less what this is? And, they make other references too to maybe what they're up to. Um, yeah, so it's not a hard read. It's incredibly fun. It is thought provoking. Absolutely. Um, and I think, well, let me just say there are some other stories that I've read this year that really devastated me. Minor Detail by Adanya Shibley, which I think is a very topical book too, given everything that's happening in the Middle East. It's such a powerful story, and again, it left me just utterly gutted. Suicide by Edouard Levy. I'm probably butchering the name. I can't speak French, but it's again such a powerful book. It's his sort of ode to a friend who killed himself, and then he wrote it and then killed himself too. And so knowing that makes it even more poignant when you read it. But it's incredibly powerful literature and so well done. Um, I've also, again, trying to catch up on literature. I've been just so blown away by the two novels of Flannery O'Connor, Wise Blood and The Violent Bear It Away. Again, those aren't hard works to read. In many ways, they are entertaining works of literature, but they're darkly entertaining. And at the end, both to me are just devastating books. And Member of the Wedding by Carson McCullers. Her I've now read two works by her, and that one, I mean, wow, it just it is as much a work of existentialism as Camus' The Stranger or Sartre's Nausea. It is absolutely literary existentialism, but told through the lens of a girl who's on the cusp of puberty. And the prose itself just is phenomenal. Like stylistically, it's singular to me. I don't know who she's quite like in that book other than herself, and I just love what she does with both the story and the voice. It's so powerful. Highly recommend.
it's already been an hour, and now I still feel like you have 1,000 more books to talk to me about. And I just interrupted way too much.
No, I'm happy to do it. I love what you're doing here with this podcast. I've listened to every episode, and they've all been phenomenal. They've all been Both I think very fun and thought provoking, but also they've given me hope. In addition to reading, I'm trying to write. I've written a work of nonfiction in the past, but now I'm trying to write fiction. And hearing some of your other guests talk about their experiences writing fiction has given me a lot of hope and encouraged me to persevere in this crazy world of publishing literature.
Oh,
And of course, your own story is very, um, I think, very inspiring to me as well. And I'm just glad for everything you're doing here.
oh my gosh, that's way too kind. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and in the words of my daughter,
let's hip hop our way out.